Good day, everyone. My name is Linda Foining, and you are listening to Umoja Sessions. This specialty episode is one of many in a series about African entrepreneurs that are employing creative and innovative ways to excel in their niche, as well as lead in their communities. This is their story. Today, we travel to New Jersey, which is where our guest Kuda Biza lives. I suggest you grab a paper and pen because let me tell you, folks, you're in for a treat. Kuda is a serial entrepreneur who started his first company when he was only 9 years old in Zimbabwe. He then moved to the US with only $40 in his pocket to study at Lynn University, where he started his second company. He is also the author of the book The S.P.E.A.R Method and is the co-founder and CMO of NonBelievable, a mission-based baked goods company that donates meals for every box of cookies sold. The company is backed by the one and only Tony Robbins, Idea Lab NY, and Loeb NYC. Prior to this, he spent over a decade in various innovation and e-commerce roles at Newell Brands, which is a Fortune 500 firm, and it's home to iconic brands such as Yankee Candle, Crock-Pot, Sharpie, you name it. Kuda, welcome to Umoja Sessions.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Kuda. So I could go on and talk about you, but I would like you to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. As you mentioned, I'm Kuda Biza. I was born in Zimbabwe. I was born in a family with 4 sisters, so it was quite interesting growing up being the only son. It had its pluses and minuses, but I don't regret one bit. A little bit about my name, Kuda. My full name actually is Kuda Kwashe. In English, it means that it is the love of God. My parents gave me that name because before I was born, my parents actually had a son, and when he was maybe about 3 years old, one day he went to nursery school and somehow he got poisoned. And, when he came back home, he was very sick. He was vomiting blood. By the time they took him to the hospital, it was too late. He was literally in the hospital for a few more hours and then he passed away. They named me Kuda Kwashe, which I said the love of God, because they felt it was the love of God for them to have another son. So that's the story behind my name and a little bit of background about a tragic event that my parents went through. But I embrace the name and, live for myself and my brother. So my parents now have 2 for 1.
Wow, that's a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that with us, Kuda. I had no idea. You are, like I said, a serial entrepreneur. You've been able to lift yourself by the bootstraps. And, I want to talk a little bit about your journey while you were at Newell before we dive into the meat of things. But you were responsible for launching several multi-million dollar strategic new growth initiatives. And the specific one we talked about was Crock-Pot. And you reached over 20 million in annual sales in 3 years. And you ran a 75 million e-commerce division. I'd like us to talk a little bit about your journey at Newell.
Yeah. So what's interesting, when I look back and reflect, which is actually funny, is that when I was in college, I double majored in aviation and business. And when I graduated, I had 2 job offers. So I had one offer to go work at AirTran, which was an airline based in Orlando. I had a situation where I actually just bumped into the CEO at AirTran and he liked me and, he had facilitated that opportunity. And then another opportunity to go work at Jordan Consumer Solutions, which is now Newell Brands, in their marketing team. I decided to go the business route, right? Because I was like, you know what? The aviation industry during that time was going through like a lot of shaky stuff. It was after 2008, after the recession. And so I decided to go into the whole marketing, perspective with Jordan Consumer Solutions. What was interesting was that when they hired me full time, they had just created a new division, and the division was called Transformational Innovation. And a little bit about the company, the company at the time had like maybe more than 200 brands. And I'm not just talking about regular brands. I'm talking about well-known brands, the ones that you'd see on your shelf at Walmart, at Target, market leaders within their specific category. But what would also happen was that there had been some disruptions within some of the categories they owned. So an example is coffee. So Mr. Coffee, number one brand for quite some time, but then Keurig out of nowhere just came in and started stealing share. So there was a recognition internally that if the company didn't innovate, it'll die, right? To some extent. So they created this small little team whose job was to come up with disruptive new businesses. So I'm not talking about a new product like a slicker look on a coffee maker, but literally a business that didn't exist. And I had started a business when I was in college, so I really fitted the profile of the type of candidates that they were looking for. And basically, they were like, hey, you guys have to figure out new businesses that we should launch, build your business case, come and pitch us. So think of it like a Shark Tank. And then if your business case makes sense, we will fund it and we'll take it to market. We started evaluating so many different trends and verticals. And then one really resonated with us, which was around meal delivery. So if you think about the time now, it was maybe like around 2012. A lot of the meal delivery services were starting to gain momentum. So think of your Blue Apron, Plated, HelloFresh. These companies were raising money like crazy. Like Blue Apron, I remember 50 million in a year. In 1 year, they were able to get $50 million from VCs. So there was a lot of activity in the space. And we had the unique opportunity that we're the number one brand in slow cooking, which is Crock-Pot. And if you think about household penetration, so many households in America have a slow cooker. Some households have multiple slow cookers. So we already had a huge customer base. However, whenever the customer would use the slow cooker, we were not part of that particular activity, right? They would have to go buy their own ingredients at the store and so forth and so forth. So similar to like how Keurig had a durable consumable model where they would sell you the coffee brewer as well as the coffee cups, we felt it was an opportunity for us to come up with a meal delivery system with meals specifically configured for a slow cooker. So think about having all your ingredients in one place. Everything is all mixed up for you, and all you just needed to do was take that frozen meal out of the freezer, put it into your slow cooker, add water, turn it on, and you're out the door. And by the time you come back home 8 hours later, you have a meal. So that was the idea that we had. And it was a project that I had to lead. And I had to take it from an idea that was on a napkin, develop it, commercialize it, and scale it. So that was the journey that I took, and we saw really good success. But obviously, with success, they come some learnings along the way. And when we had reached a really solid base in terms of subscribers, we realized that we had to either invest more money to really scale it. That's why like the Blue Aprons of the world were raising so much capital, or we had to look for a strategic partnership to help accelerate the growth. And we decided to go with a strategic partnership, and that partner turned out to be Omaha Stakes. And we signed an agreement with them, and we were able to scale the business tremendously.
Right. But before going into Omaha Stakes, in our previous talk, you mentioned how your back was basically against the wall at that stage in your job. And can you tell us how you were able to get that partnership? How your relationships were going at work? You must have been under a tremendous amount of stress.
Yeah, well, stress is a very it's a very heavy word, right? But to give you context, I was in a multi-billion-dollar company, so there are certain expectations at that level, right? For projects, so opportunities have to be at a certain level, right? If you're working on $1 million idea, to them it's small, right? But to you it could be big, but in the whole grand scheme of things, it's not a big opportunity for the company. So we were a small fish in a big pond, and as a way for the organization to really align its resources with big opportunities, we were basically given an ultimatum on figuring out how to scale it, or otherwise, it didn't really make sense for the organization to put more resources on it. So it was more like, hey, if you guys don't figure it out in 30, 60 days or whatever, we're going to have to kill this project because you could be working on the next big $1 billion idea. So from my perspective, Crock-Pot Cuisine was my baby. So it was more like hearing someone saying like, "Hey, Abraham, go to the top of the mountain and sacrifice Isaac," type of thing. So obviously I didn't want that, right? So a little bit of grace comes into play in the story, because what happened was when we had that meeting, I decided to do something I never did, which was go back to school, to my alma mater, for their CEO series. And at the time, I'm not sure if they still host them, but they would do them every Wednesday at 7 p.m. And I would never go, right? Because, I was focused on working and things like that. But that Wednesday, I decided to go. And I got there a little late and sat in the back. And there was a guy who was presenting, Stephen Crane, who had built multiple frozen food businesses that he scaled. I'm sitting there, I'm like, wow, this guy has done what I'm trying to do. So at the end of it, I went to him, I gave him a business card, I invited him to come to the office and check out what we're working on, to which he did. And in the meeting, I then expressed that, hey, we're looking for partners, and a great partner would be Omaha Stakes. And it turned out that he was really close friends with the family that actually owns Omaha Stakes. So that's where, the grace part comes. So he was able to help me facilitate a meeting to meet with them. And then I went over there, I did my pitch, and as they say, the rest is history.
Wow. I think that's an incredible story because I couldn't believe it when you mentioned that to me. A lot of people, when they find themselves in situations like that, their first response would be to flee or to hide or to give up. But instead, you did what you'd never done before to achieve something you'd never achieved before. That's definitely something to look at and to admire.
Yeah, and you know what they say, right? You can't keep on doing the same thing and expect different results, right? So if you want to see a different result, you're going to have to try something different. In that particular moment, I was just looking for inspiration and to just kind of like just hear other CEOs, and it just turned out it was my lucky day, and it happened and everything turned out well.
Yes, it definitely did because after that, you were able to then move on to even bigger ventures, which is the partnership that you have with NonBelievable, the cookies with Tony Robbins and Idea Lab New York. Can we talk a little bit about that for a second?
Sure. So I would like to maybe take a step back a little bit, because I think painting the picture with the background helps. So when I was at Lynn, you did mention that I started a business, and the
Hmm.
business I started was a social venture called AFR Clothing, which had the premise of, if you buy a t-shirt, we would donate money to send a kid to school. Because having grown up in Africa, I'd witnessed poverty, and in Zimbabwe, public education is not free. So if you don't have the money, or if your parents have passed away and you're an orphan, chances are, if no one is looking out for you, you're not getting an education. So social enterprise has always been something that was near and dear in my heart.
That's right. So you founded Amani Hope Foundation. That is the nonprofit organization that would go to empowering underprivileged children for scholarships, right?
Correct. So the way it would work would be, AFR Clothing is a business, Amani Hope Foundation is a nonprofit. So AFR Clothing would donate to Amani Hope Foundation, and then Amani Hope Foundation, we have a team on the ground in Zimbabwe with an executive director and some volunteers and a board and whatnot, and we're also registered as a nonprofit in Zimbabwe, which allows us to then go to the districts or the certain regions looking for children, primarily orphans, who are not going to school. And then we would step in and say like, okay, we'll come in and we'll pay for their tuition. So that's how we had set that up. But how it ties into the NonBelievable story we're talking about is that when the conversation for NonBelievable was being had, this is before I was even part of the frame, they were looking for an entrepreneur with two things. The first thing is an entrepreneur who's been able to build a food-based business at scale. And I had done that with Crock-Pot Cuisine, right? I was able to, take a concept from scratch, create a meal delivery business. We created recipes, dealt with the FDA, USDA, did all that 9 yards, had production facilities across the country, and we were shipping frozen meals across the country and built a multi-million-dollar business doing that. So that was kind of like the first thing that they were looking for, someone who knew that process around the food side, but also understood customer acquisition from an online perspective. How do you drive traffic to a website, convert, and things like that? And then the second piece was someone who had experience building a social impact business. Because when the concept for NonBelievable came about, the idea was to build it more like a Tom's Shoes, more like a Bombas, with a buy one, give one model. Reason why the vision was set that way was because when Tony Robbins was flying out to San Francisco, he read about a group of nuns that were being evicted in San Francisco. So he went out there and decided to help. So he helped them with their rent and then worked with a few of his friends like Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, to come up with some money, and they helped the nuns to set them up on really good feet. Once they had helped the nuns to not get evicted, they learned that the nuns were baking cookies and selling the cookies at farmers markets. But instead of them using that money for their own sustenance, they were using the money to support a soup kitchen that was feeding 400 people per day in San Francisco. So Tony, being Tony, he then was like, hey, hunger is one of my most important causes. Why don't we create a brand taking inspiration from the nuns, where for each box of cookies that we sell, we feed people? So, Tony then reached out to the folks at Idea Lab and Loeb NYC, and, they created the company and they capitalized the business. But they needed operators, right? They needed that entrepreneur who could then come in and actually make that vision reality. So that's where myself and my business partner, Brian Janesco, came in. And Brian was my business partner when I was creating Crock-Pot Cuisine. And his background also is around creating, businesses. He's a serial entrepreneur just like me. So then when you get a call like that, out of the blue, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to partner with, not just Tony, but people like Michael Loeb, who was one of the guys behind Priceline.com and a few other major successes. So for an African kid who came to America with $40 in his pocket, it was too good to be true. So I jumped on it and I was like, hey, the worst thing is I'm going to learn something, right? If we don't build this to be a success. But obviously you go into it with the hopes that, you're going to build something that's really going to make a big difference and make a dent in the hunger crisis here in the US.
And I just want to point out to our listeners who might not know who Tony Robbins is. He is an American author, coach, motivational speaker, philanthropist, you name it. And he wrote several self help books like Awaken the Giant Within, which is the one that I read and the one that I love. And he wrote another book called Unlimited Power. And these are motivational books, and these are books that can change your life. And I would urge our listeners to go and look at YouTube videos as to how to improve yourself, how to motivate yourself, and how to awaken the giant within. And now, speaking of books, I think it's time for us to pivot and talk about your book that you just released. Actually, it's called The S.P.E.A.R Method. Can you tell us more about your book, please?
Well, being African and we use spears to hunt, I thought it made sense to talk about how to use a spear. Now I'm just joking. The Spear Method. This is a book that I spent quite some time on, and the full title for the Spear Method is The Spear Method: 5 Simple Steps to Balanced Success and Fulfillment. And for me, I thought it was a relevant topic to talk about because a lot of people were all caught up in the pursuit of success. And at times, we actually do it by trading off our own personal fulfillment. And it was something that I saw when, I was in this big Fortune 500 company. I was leading businesses that were generating millions and millions of dollars. But given my background and my passion for social entrepreneurship, I wasn't really fulfilled with the work that I was doing because I wanted to see more impact, right? How could we impact our communities more? How could we make a direct difference with what we're working on to really touch people's lives? And I wanted to write the book so that people who are also maybe in the same struggle, trying to figure out how can you be both successful and fulfilled? How could you do that? And I follow a lot of successful people and try to see what is it that they do, and also just to get a sense of are they fulfilled or not. And through kind of like watching a lot of successful people, I interviewed quite a bunch of them as well. And some of those interview excerpts are in the book. I learned that there was a framework where you could actually achieve both success and fulfillment. And you were talking about Tony Robbins a little earlier. He has a quote that I love, which says, success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. So think about it. There are miserable billionaires out there, but they have all the money in the world, but they're miserable. Why?
Mm.
Because they focused on just the pursuit of success, but didn't take into account their own personal fulfillment. So the interesting thing about success is that success is more of an external metric, right? You know, the car you drive, the house you have, how much money you have, while fulfillment is more internal, how you feel. The S.P.E.A.R method then kind of like balances the two, and it's really an acronym. S for the S.P.E.A.R method stands for seek your why. So it's super important for you to know your purpose and have clarity of your purpose, because think about it. If you get into your car, start your engine, reverse, and get into drive, but then you don't know where you're going, what's going to happen? You're just going to just drive around aimlessly,
Aimlessly.
just burning gas, right? But if you get into your car knowing that, hey, I want to go to Rhode Island, I'm going to go meet Linda, and we're going to have an amazing meeting talking about Umoja Sessions.
Mm.
You get on the highway with a lot of purpose and clarity, knowing where you need to go, right? At what exit you need to get off. So it's super important for you to actually do that. So you just don't want to go through life having not done an exercise where you really understand what is your why, what is your purpose in life. And yes, it might take a little bit of figuring out, but you need to be constantly doing that, because you ultimately find it. And in the book, I outline a couple of questions that you can ask, and also a technique that you could do to help you do that, which I'll share with you a little bit. So one technique you could do is you could email 5 people who really know you really, really well, and just ask them one simple question. And the question is, what makes me unique? They're going to tell you what makes you unique. And through that, you can start really understanding what is it that you and only you can contribute to the world, to the people around you. And then you can start having a little bit more clarity around your purpose. And once you have understanding of what your purpose is, you move into the second step, which is plan. As you know, failing to plan is planning to fail, and any goal without a plan is just a wish. So you actually then now need to start planning as to, okay, I know that I need to get to Rhode Island, but am I going to take I-95? Am I going to take the back roads? What road am I going to take to get to this destination? So, as I mentioned earlier, I went to school to do aviation and business. And in aviation, one of the things we learned was that every flight needs a flight plan. So if you go to the airport, imagine you're a passenger, right? And you're about to take a flight, and you find out that the pilots don't have a flight plan. Would you freak out? Would you be okay? Like, how would you react? So it's the same thing with life, right? We have a lot of people who are spectators, and they're not the captain pilots of their life. So you need to create a plan as to how you're going to achieve your purpose, how you're going to achieve your why. And then once you have your plan, it's super important for you to execute. Because if you have a plan and then you tuck it into a drawer and lock it, or you put it in a safe and throw away the keys, what good does it help, right? It's important for you to take action.
So I think that the execute part is the part where a lot of people get stuck. Can you tell us why and how we can get out of that situation?
I agree with you, firstly, that a lot of people get stuck on execution. And one of the things I've seen and have read through research is it's really fear, right? Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, self-doubt. So for example, we were all just born as kind of like babies with a gift or whatever. So if you eventually become a CEO, you were not born a CEO. Usain Bolt wasn't born a gold medalist or the fastest man in the world. He had to execute, right? He had to work out a plan. He had to train every single day to become who he is. But perhaps I could have been the fastest man in the world, but because I didn't train and I didn't execute and I didn't put in the action that was required for me to be on that starting line with him, then it never happened. So, fear, first of all, is the enemy because our brain is wired for survival. It's not wired for us to thrive. The brain just wants you to be safe and to survive. But the dichotomy is that in order for you to thrive, right, to achieve success and your fullest potential, you have to be comfortable with stepping outside your comfort zone. Because when you step outside the comfort zone, that's where growth actually happens. Life begins outside of your comfort zone. So let's take an example. Let's say if I say like, hey, I want to lose weight. I come up with my plan, and my plan is, I'm going to run every day, but then I actually never run, or I'm going to run and eat nutritious food and stop eating fast food, but never do it. It'll never happen, right? If I stay in my comfort zone, I need to go outside of my comfort zone, i.e. work out, eat differently, do different things that I've never done before in order for me to see the result. The other thing that stops people is their desire to just stay in their comfort zone. You need to be uncomfortable staying in your comfort zone. You need to be comfortable staying outside of your comfort zone. I don't know if that makes sense.
Definitely. You need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
And then in the book, I also talk about a few tips to train yourself how to do that, because I call it conscious risk taking, where you're consciously taking a risk knowing that is going to lead to growth. So what is conscious risk taking? So for example, you can just say like, hey, this morning I'm going to take a cold shower, right? You're stepping outside your comfort zone. You're training your brain to be comfortable with doing something that it doesn't want to do, but you're comfortable doing that. Or if you're going to go run, and if you usually run 2 miles, run 4, because then there's that point where your brain is going to tell you to stop, but then you train that muscle. So think of it as a muscle that you're training, your willpower to just push through the pain, because the brain actually tells you to give up when you've only reached 40% of your potential. So there's a whole 60% of potential that we're not tapping into every single day. But the people that do are the people that then achieve massive success. So that's why it's said, fortune favors the bold. The people who are bold enough to, go through that 40% wall where the brain is telling you, don't go that extra mile, don't go that extra step. Those are the ones who end up being successful. But the ones who want to be comfortable, they don't want to feel any pain, they don't want to take that cold shower, once in a while to just kind of like get you comfortable with being outside of your comfort zone, they are just mediocre, if it makes sense.
That makes total sense. And so basically, after executing, the next one would be achieve.
Correct. So you're going to achieve some sort of result. But I always like to say that the very first and most important achievement is that first step of you stepping outside of your comfort zone. So if you actually just come up with a plan and you execute, and you're getting yourself outside of your comfort zone, you have actually achieved something. Because sometimes it's not always about the goal, but it's who you become in the pursuit of that goal. Because it's more important for you to actually become a different person, right? It's going to take a different Linda for you to start a podcast. You had to become someone different in order for you to have this platform, because you could have been doing something else with your Saturdays, right? You could be watching TV, you could be laying around, but you had to step outside that comfortable zone to do this. So that's an achievement in itself. It is through kind of like perseverance in your execution, which is another level of achievement, that your dream will actually come true. So I'll tell you a little story here. So I came from a lower middle class family in Zimbabwe. So when I'll tell my friends and my family that, hey, I want to go to America for school, people, it didn't really make sense, because they were like, how are you going to do that? Like, how is that going to happen? Like, we don't have, the resources. But I was willing to go and execute, to go outside of my comfort zone to figure out how to make it happen. So long story short, when I graduated high school, I had an offer to go to a university in Zimbabwe with the money covered, right? There was a program that was going to cover all the fees and whatnot. But it wasn't my why. It wasn't my purpose. My purpose, my dream was to come to America, make something of myself here, and then make a difference in Africa. So I declined it, and everybody thought I was crazy. And I had to persevere. So for 2 years, since the day I made that decision of not going to that Zimbabwe university, I had to just apply for scholarship after scholarship. And then 2 years later, so think about it, my classmates were now getting into their junior year. And then that's when I finally got accepted to go for my freshman year. But what's also interesting is that when I went back to Zimbabwe about 7 years later, I found, my classmates who had gone to school, who were laughing at me, telling me like, hey, you're crazy. Why are you chasing this dream? They were stuck. The unemployment rate in Zimbabwe was at that time 95%. So they didn't have any jobs. You have people with medical degrees or engineering degrees working as shoe repair people or working as a bus conductor. And I could have been in that same boat, but because of that perseverance to achieve something and to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, I ended up leading a different path. But which leads me to the last one, which is R, which is repeat, is that you can't just do it once and then you're done, right? It's like,
Yeah.
let's say, breathing. If you take a breath right now and then you say like, oh, okay, my lungs are good, I can stop breathing, what will happen? You'll die, because you need to consistently repeat that action of breathing in order for you to stay alive. It's the same thing with your goals, or your dreams, or your purpose. There's never a time where your purpose will cease, right? Until you die. You just have to continue doing what you need to do in pursuit of it until you achieve it. So it's what I call a state of continual becoming, where you're continuing to become that person you're meant to be over and over and over again. So you cannot survive on your last breath. You just have to keep on inhaling, exhaling. Same thing with your goals. You just have to keep on, pushing through. If you reach one milestone, you pick another milestone and you keep moving. So for example, I've written this book. I celebrate for a day or two, but then I dive into the next one and then focus on that next goal.
I like what you said about the continual success. It reminded me of a quote. I think it was by Earl Nightingale or Jim Rohn, one of the two. It says, success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Like you said, it's progressive, it's continuous. You never stop. There is an end goal with the date that you've given it. But once you reach that goal, now you have to reach for something more and then more. That resonated a lot with me the first time I heard that. I think you said something earlier when we talked about failures and seeing it as a positive learning experience. And can we talk a little bit about that? How can you turn failures into successes? Because as you mentioned, the most successful people in the world are the ones that fail the most.
In Africa, I don't know about Cameroon, but in Zimbabwe, we experience a lot of power cuts here and there. So I'm pretty sure like you don't take having a light bulb and just electricity for granted, do you? So Thomas Edison, he had 10,000 failures before he figured out how to make a light bulb work. So imagine if he had given up on the second try, right? We would
Mm.
have light. Or if he had given up on the 9,999. And for a guy like him, with all his inventions and all the great things he achieved, he said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I found 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. So it's all about perception and it's all about the story you tell yourself. Because one of the things that I've learned is that self talk, the conversation that you have in your brain with yourself, is either going to empower you or it's going to disempower you. So if you tell yourself, like, oh, I failed, I'm a failure, I'm stupid, I'm an idiot, what do you think is going to happen, like, when you're faced with another challenge or another predicament that you need to figure out a way to navigate, right? So, from my perspective, I don't view anything as a failure. I view everything that others might perceive as a failure as a learning experience,
Mm.
because it is through learning that you actually find what works.
Mhm.
Especially if you're a pioneer, especially if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're someone who's disruptive, because you're creating things, you're building roads that no one has built. So, like, let's say when I was building Crock-Pot Cuisine, there was never a meal delivery business for Crock-Pot before, right? Or for slow cooker based meals. There was no, line of meals specifically for that. I had to figure it out. So if I was trying things and then say like, oh, I failed here, I would have been telling myself a narrative that would have just literally crushed me, right? And not motivated me to move forward. So, in order for you to succeed, you need to try a lot of things. You need to kiss a lot of frogs, right? Until you find the right one. And it is true that the most successful people are the people that fail the most. So I'll give you an example. There was a documentary a few months ago called The Last Dance of the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan and whatnot. And Michael Jordan, the reason why he is Michael Jordan is because nobody worked as hard, nobody failed like he did. During the summer, when other NBA players were on vacation and relaxing, partying, he was training. He was training. There was a season where he was shooting a movie and he would spend the whole day shooting. And then in the evening, he would play like 2-3 hour, like full on games of basketball. And the amount of practice that he would put in, the hours, it was immense. And Bruce Lee said something that resonates with me. He said that I'm not afraid of the man who knows how to do 10,000 kicks. I'm afraid of the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times, right? From that perspective, you can kind of like see what it takes in order for you to be successful. Because if you're going to practice one kick 10,000 times, think about how you're going to fail, right? Just to make it perfect. But once you make it perfect and then you hit someone with it, they're not waking up. You need to learn how to, put in the hours for whatever you're doing, because then people get rewarded in public what they do in private. So when you see the people who are achieving tremendous success, the LeBron James, the Michael Jordans, and so forth, it's because of the amount of work they put behind the scenes. You might have the talent, yes, but if you're not putting in the work, there's so many talented people who don't even make it to professional level. In fact, in my book, I even have the stats of what it takes for you to win a championship, like the odds for you to win a championship in the NBA. It's like in the 0.03 percentile range because of, think about it. About 500,000 male high school students play basketball. A fraction of those are going to get to college. A fraction of those are going to be drafted. And then a fraction of those students actually get to be on a championship team. In order for you to succeed, you need to be comfortable with failing, because Michael Jordan got cut on his high school varsity team. He could have just viewed that as a failure and say like, hey, I'm not a basketball guy. Let me just go read books or study or whatever. But he didn't view that as failure. He actually saw that as fuel and motivation to say like, well, okay, well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you that I'm the best. And then you know what? He became the best.
That's amazing. Honestly, your story is quite inspiring because you were challenged and you've been challenged several times with something that you didn't know how to do, but you figured it out in the end. I believe there's a quote very similar to that that says if somebody brings you an opportunity that you don't know how to do, say yes and then go figure out how to do it. I think your life story is basically that quote is, figuring out how to do things as you go and connecting the dots backwards and not forward.
You can never connect the dots looking forward, but you only connect them looking backwards. So, for example, we were talking about NonBelievable. When I was working on Crock-Pot Cuisine, would I have been able to say like, oh yeah, I'm going to work on this project so that when I'm done, I'm going to go build a cookie company? No. Or even when I was building AFR clothing when I was in college, when I started working on it with $150 in my dorm room, there was no way I was going to know that this particular sweat that I'm putting in to this project is going to be a key determining factor in me being a co-founder and a CMO of a company that has world-class investors. There was no way I could have known. But if I had stopped or given up at some point when things were tough, try launching a brand with $150. That's what I did. It's tough. It's not easy. But because of that, it opened up some doors.
And, Kuda, you've told us your reason for doing all of this. From birth, you've been blessed with having your parents guiding you and having your family behind you. I would like you to give a 1 minute message to the youth, the aspiring entrepreneur listening to you. What would be the message that you can give to them?
Well, I think my message is simple. Read the S.P.E.A.R method. There's a lot of nuggets and pieces of advice in there. But if you want a one-liner that I will share with listeners today is take more risks. The graveyard is filled with so many unwritten books, so many business plans that could have been, so many songs that we could have listened to
Mm.
because people were afraid to take a risk and ended up dying without sharing that gift with the world. Think about it. There's only one Linda. There's only one Linda Forwarding, right? Only one out of 7 point something billion people. You hear people saying like you're one out of a million. That's nothing. You're one out of 7.5 billion. And you're gonna not show the world the talents and the gifts and your shining star. Only you have the fingerprint you have. And I actually believe that you have an obligation as a human being, you have a responsibility to shine bright and show the world who you are and what you're made of. So, in 3 words, what I would say to the listeners is take more risks. And I'm not saying like, go climb Mount Everest without training or something like that. No, but just be comfortable doing those things that make you uncomfortable, because that's how you're going to grow. In finance, there's a whole concept around compound interest, and compound interest is what I would say the number one blessing to mankind. It's the eighth wonder of the world. And I'll just kind of like share really quick how it works, right? So let's say you invest $1,000 and it's being invested at 10% using compound interest. It would mean that by the end of that year, you're going to have $1,100, right? 10% of 1,000, which is 100. So now
Mm.
you have 1,100. But
Mhm.
what's going to happen in year 2 is that it's now going to be 10% of 1,100 as opposed to 10% of 1,000. So now your interest starts making money. The same concept is true for action and taking more risks. So if you consistently take action every single day, if you consistently take risks every single day, that compounded effect over time, that's where you'll see the exponential growth.
Honestly, Kuda, you have been a wealth of knowledge today. Before we end, can you tell our listeners where they can find you online, where they can get your book, The Spear Method?
Sure. So you can slide into my DM on Instagram at Kuda Biza. So Kudabiza. A little bit about Instagram. I actually never used to have an Instagram until maybe about a month ago. It's one of those things where I'm now practicing what I preach, which is stepping outside my comfort zone. So I'm still learning and new to it, but I'm happy that I did it. You can go to my website, spearmethod.com, and over there it's my personal website. You'll see the book, you'll also see some of the other stuff that I'm doing. So it's a pretty cool place for you to kind of like check out and learn and see. If you want to have some delicious cookies and change the world at the same time, you can go to nonbelievable.com. So NUN, like a nun, the sisters, and then believable. So nonbelievable.com. And then you can grab that. And you can also buy the book on Amazon. You can just search Kuda Biza, Spear Method, or just search Kuda Biza, and you'll be able to see the book.
That's great. And what if you want to provide some help with the Amani Hope Foundations and the scholarships? Where can we find information about that?
Yeah, so you can go to the Amani Hope Foundation website. So it's Amani Hope. So AMANI HOP.org. So
Hmm.
Amani hope.org.
Thank you so much, Kuda. Like I said, you have been a wealth of knowledge. I just want to summarize a little bit of the things that we've talked about today. So, to those listening and to those who are going through a lot during this crisis, if you fail, try to see it as a positive learning experience and try to make it a success, because you shouldn't let fear be a paralyzing agent. You shouldn't let it set you back, because like we said, most people in the world, the most successful people in the world, are the ones that have failed the most. And speaking of social impact and social entrepreneurship, the one thing that I can take from that is that doing good and doing well are not mutually exclusive. You can do both. You can help others and you can do well for yourself as well. I would like to end this interview and this Umoja Sessions podcast by the quote that I always end with, which is Elimu ni msingi wa maisha. It's a Swahili proverb that means education is the foundation of life. Thank you for listening to Umoja Sessions. My name is Linda Foinding. I am a princess warrior and an Afro optimist.